Why is social change?
No, they're both
They got to
bills.
apply Georgia first. It's for the SEC
One,
changes.
two,
Once Georgia loses to Auburn or Babylon.
What? Check to make sure that maybe like it's just the font is like black or something like that.
Yeah.
Given that both of you have
Oh,
ideas.
yeah, we got it.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Go ahead and pull up the two different spreadsheets that I sent you. You put one of them in the background and then keep the other one, obviously. But we're going to start with this one, the construction loan schedule.
Which one's that?
Or the construction loan schedule.
Get the zoom out. I zoom out? Yeah, it's the same thing.
Oh.
No, that's, she don't need it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, is everybody got everything pulled up? All right, let's go and get started. So the one thing about today that's going to be a little bit different, you probably figured out if you look at the spreadsheets, they're already filled in, okay? So there's nothing to actually have to fill in today, at least not in terms of formulas. And part of the reason I did this is because with the construction loan schedule, there's really not a lot to it in terms of formulas, okay? And it's actually pretty straightforward. And so what we're going to spend our time doing is I'm going to go through and kind of explain how it works, kind of explain the few formulas that there are in there, and sort of work through a couple of examples, and then after that, then we'll do the quiz, and we've got a few other things to talk about, and kind of go from there. So, This first one, the construction loan schedule. This is kind of, I'm going to walk you through just kind of the mechanics of it, how it works, and the way to think about it. First of all, construction loans are very different than permanent loans, okay? And what I mean by that is, construction loans you should think of as like a line of credit, okay? And as such, you don't borrow all of the money up front. You borrow it, in essence, in phases, or in what are called draws, okay? And so, just to kind of think through this, that let's say that you've got a property, ignore the model here for a second, but just kind of think about this. You've got a $10 million property that you're building. You know, you go to the bank, and typically, the normal sort of approach when getting a construction loan is they're going to say, okay, what equity are you going to contribute into the deal? Most of the time, the idea would be that you would own the land that the property is being built on outright, okay? And that's just kind of like the normal standard kind of thing, is that you own the land, and you own the land free and clear. And that's usually sufficient equity from the lender's perspective to be able to give you a construction loan on the property. Okay, does that make sense to begin with? Okay. Now, given that that's normally the case, so you go in, like I said, and we're talking about this property that maybe the land value is, let's say, you know, a couple of $1 million, and then the part of what you're going to construct on the land is maybe $8 million. So $10 million overall value for the property. You are not going to go into the lender and say, okay, I've got this $2 million, you know, land that I own free and clear. You know, it's been my family for years, or however you acquired it, but you own it free and clear. But you're not going to go in there and you're not going to say, okay, give me $8 million. And they're going to hand over $8 million for you to go run and play with and build your property. That's not the way it works, okay? The way it works is you go in and you say, okay, here are my plans. You know, the property, it's going to cost me roughly $8 million to build this thing. I want, in essence, an $8 million line of credit. And what is going to happen is, over however long the construction period is, you know, whether it's a year, 18 months, 2 years, depending on how, you know, big or small the project is, the lender is going to allow you to come in, typically at the end of each month, and you're going to deliver them basically a box of receipts. And you're going to say, all right, you know, here are my set of receipts for basically the groundwork that was done. Here's the receipts that for basically the foundation that was laid. Here are the receipts for basically putting up the tilt walls. Here's the receipts for the roofers. Here's the receipts for the plumbers, the electricians, and so forth, so on. And each month, you're going to go in there, you're going to submit those receipts, and then they're going to give you, in essence, the money to pay those contractors. Now, every lender is a little bit different in terms of how much control or oversight or freedom that they're going to give you as the borrower. In some cases, they're going to give you that money to be able to pay your contractors, and you're going to be responsible still for cutting the check to the contractors. In other instances, the lenders are going to exert a lot more control, that literally you give them the receipt, they will then cut a check directly to the contractor, okay? So it can work a variety of different ways, all depending on the lender. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, now, in terms of how the interest is calculated and how the construction loan works, the way that I've always found it easiest to think of is it's like a credit card, okay? That you don't get charged any interest until you actually charge something, okay? Well, that's the same way for the construction loan. That even though you're going to eventually borrow a total of $8 million for this project, but you're not going to borrow all of it at once. You're going to borrow it in phases over time. So why would you be wanting to pay interest on the entire $8 million, you know, for the entire, you know, duration of the construction period? Instead, you're going to accumulate a balance over time. Now, that having been said, one of the common questions is, okay, during that construction period, do I actually have to pay anything back to the lender? Totally depends. In In a lot of cases, no. During the construction period, the idea is the property is not generating income. So why would the lender expect any sort of payment? Okay? But once again, every lender is a little bit different. Some may want some modicum of an interest payment, some may not. Okay? But in many cases, what happens is you just accumulate that balance over time, and at the end of the construction period, you enter into what is referred to as a takeout commitment. Have you heard that phrase before, takeout commitment? Yes, no? I see a few heads bobbing up and down, a few no. Okay, a takeout commitment is in essence something that you need to provide to the construction lender at some point. Now, in some cases, they may actually require this quote-unquote takeout commitment prior to even making you the construction loan. In other cases, they may say, well, you know, once you're a certain way through the construction process, we're going to require this takeout commitment. Others may say, okay, you're a couple of months away from the end of the construction cycle. Now we're going to require the takeout commitment. But what is the takeout commitment? The takeout commitment is basically a commitment from a permanent lender to take out the construction lender, okay? To take them out of the process. So, for example, you've accumulated, whatever, $8 million or something like that in loans, the construction loan from the construction lender. So they want to rest assured that once the project is complete, that you've got a permanent lender lined up, ready to take them out of the process. So, because in many cases, the construction lender is not the same lender as the permanent lender. They can be, but in many cases, they're not the same, okay? And so, given that that's the case, you may have Paul as the construction lender, and he's a local lender, that's all he does is construction loans, and, payment on the other hand happens to be the, basically the institutional sort of lender that is going to, only fund projects that are fully developed, complete, occupied, that sort of thing. So Paul is not interested in being the permanent lender. He's interested in the short-term, basically, return off of being a construction lender. But Paul wants to rest assured that at the end of this construction cycle, that payment is going to be able and willing to take him out of this deal if I'm the developer. Does that make sense? Okay? So that takeout commitment is extremely important from the standpoint that, if you don't have that, what can happen is that the construction lender gets stuck, at least temporarily, having to, in essence, continue to basically be the source of financing for the project. And usually the construction lender is not going to be too happy about that. And usually the construction lender is going to have a much higher interest rate associated with making that loan than what the permanent lender is. Because the construction lender, another thing that you have to think of that they do is they don't, once again, always just assume that whatever receipts that you give them are completely accurate and that all the work has been done and everything's been done to the proper standards and that sort of thing. In many instances, the construction lender is going to either on their own or hire someone independently to go out and actually physically inspect the site to ensure that whatever work that basically the developer has said that has been done. Okay, does that make sense? So there's an added cost, if you will, in terms of that kind of inspections process that the construction lender engages in on a regular continuous basis to make sure that, yeah, okay, you just submitted a $50,000 bill for a slab to be paid, or slab to be poured, and they got to the site, there is no slab, well, then they're going to be like, okay, what happened here? And want to investigate that and potentially, obviously, not make any payment. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah. Are there instances where the construction lender will not take over as a permanent lender?
In most instances, they don't. They don't become the permanent lender. And as I said, it's just
If you
normally,
don't have a takeout lender lined up. that's kind of-
most of the time, the construction lender is gonna require that a takeout commitment is in place fairly early on in the construction process, if not before the construction process even begins. But in other words, they don't want that risk hanging over their head, is what I'm saying. Yep.
If there's like extra red tape and higher interest rates, why wouldn't you just take out a larger loan to the primary lender to cover the construction costs?
Different interest rates.
Okay, one more time, let me hear that again.
Why wouldn't, instead of having a construction loan and a primary lender, why wouldn't you just cut out the construction loan if there's more red tape and higher interest rates and just take out a little bit more?
Well, think about it. The permanent loan lender would have nothing to show for what they're lending on.
Huh.
I mean, think about it. I mean, in other words, because basically what you're saying is, okay, I trust you, Mr. Developer. I'm going to give you $8 million of money and trust that you build the building that you say you're going to build and get it occupied, and everything's going to be wonderful. And that's basically what would happen if the permanent lender was the only lender. In other words, that you didn't have a construction lender.
Right.
The whole role of the construction lender is that they are giving you the money in phases to actually do the development because they don't trust you. I mean, to put it bluntly, I mean, in other words, they want to ensure that whatever they're lending you money on is actually being built. Okay?
Okay.
Now, if you had a small enough project where you could just basically get a line of credit on your own, independent of whatever it is you're building, that's a whole different situation.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you were building, I don't know, some little, let's say $100,000 building, and you had a good line of credit that you could just go to your local bank and say, okay, I, Fred Forgy, I've got, great credit, so give me $100,000 cash. I'm going to go and build what I want to build. Yeah, you can do that, but that's not the same as, obviously, whenever you've got a substantial project that, a lender's just not going to be willing to do that. Yep.
How solid is that takeout commitment from the permanent lender?
You usually have to meet certain conditions in order for the takeout commitment to basically be valid. It depends on the type of property. If it's a commercial property, usually there's a lease-up requirement. But in other words, it must be, let's say, 75% pre-leased. It must have achieved a certificate of occupancy from the local government, obviously saying that it's ready to be occupied. I mean, those are probably the two of the big ones, but there could be others that sort of filter in there.
Okay. Because I was asking because, like, are there any banks, have there ever been any situations where a bank has kind of went bankrupt?
Oh, yeah.
Private financing?
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. And a matter of fact, that becomes a really big issue. Because you could have somebody that's actually self-financing a project, and I've seen this happen. Actually, back in Texas, a really, company backed by the Bass brothers, big oil-rich family. They developed a lot of property in downtown Fort Worth, and they had a situation a few years ago where they went in with the understanding that one of the local banks, Frost Bank, was willing to be the permanent lender for their project, but yet they had more than enough money to fully fund the project themselves, so they actually fronted all the money for the construction themselves with the anticipation that they had a takeout commitment from this bank. And they get basically to the point of where it's time for the takeout commitment to be engaged, and the bank basically said, we don't have the money. We are no longer solvent, or we're no longer solvent enough to be able to, issue this loan. Well, then they, of course, have the right to sue because they were given a commitment that this would be followed through and sue for specific performance.
And did they win, or?
My understanding is yes. So, in any event, the point is it's a very serious sort of thing to engage in these sort of takeout commitments because you're basically agreeing that if you meet certain, if the developer meets certain preconditions, then you're going to be able to get the loan funded. Because you don't want to be left as a developer hanging out on a limb, you know, after you've gone through the whole construction process, only to find out that your lender's not waiting there to make the final loan. Okay, all right. Other questions? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the math on this. Okay, so looking at this particular model, this is you know, as I kind of explain the logic. So for this particular loan, it's a 12% interest rate. Okay, so that's the input up here. All right, so 12% interest rate. Now, for those of you who came in late, once again, the models are already filled in. They were sent to you yesterday. So all you have to do is kind of follow along today and understand what I'm explaining. Okay, so the interest rate is 12%. And then what you've got to do is just go down and in essence fill in what are the project costs, okay, all the way through. So in this first column, let's explain a little bit about what the logic is here. First of all of the dollar amounts, the project costs that are in that particular time period are occurring as it's sort of stated over here at the end of the month, okay? Well, what is, at time period 0, what is the end of time period 0? It's the beginning of 1, okay, is a way to look at that. So in other words, whatever happens at time period 0, end of month, is happening right this minute as the project is initiated. Everything else is occurring basically at the end of each of those months. So the 1 million, in the end of the first month, $1,557,938, that is occurring obviously 30 days in, if you will, into the project, that you have submitted those costs to the lender. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay. Now, given that that is the case, you are not going to have any interest for that particular time period because the interest is really calculated on the previous 30 days, okay? Whatever the balance was for the previous 30 days. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay? Because, like I said, it's like a credit card, okay? You make the charge. Once you've made the charge, at least with this, immediately, once you've made the charge, the interest starts accruing, okay? Now, let's kind of walk you through a couple of other things. So for this first month, all right, we've got the loan balance, which is just equal to, basically, that first dispersal.
Real quick, does anybody else have a problem opening up a Mac, the Excel
Yeah,
spreadsheet?
it's
Yeah,
the way
just
you
change the font.
text the line.
Just
do what?
Oh, okay.
Change the font.
Okay, sorry.
Text.
The font, when you open it, you're not getting any numbers. You have to change the font.
I have no idea why.
Only on the minutes.
I gotta switch this, so.
Okay, all right, so anyway, for this first month, as you can see, no interest is calculated at all. Okay, now, one other thing I wanted to sort of point out, there is another column that obviously highlighted in yellow, that's an input cell column. And this is if the lender, for whatever reason, asks you or requires you to actually contribute some money toward principal reduction, okay, over time. Now, once again, this may never happen. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Once again, it could be the sort of thing that you kind of get into the project and maybe the overall project costs are escalating beyond what you had originally agreed upon with the lender. And the lender says, okay, I want you to, the land that maybe you put into the deal as equity maybe isn't enough, so I'm going to require you to put in maybe a little bit of additional equity, you know, during the actual construction period, because I'm starting to get a little worried that the overall cost of this project is ballooning to a point I'm not comfortable with. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? All right. Now, in terms of actually calculating now the interest here, okay, let's just sort of start with this one, because this is the first time that you actually see interest being calculated. But take a look at whenever you click on that cell, take a look at what highlights. It is the ending loan balance from the month before, okay, times the interest rate divided by 12. It's that simple, okay? It's not complicated. I mean, we've obviously done things a lot more complicated than that. So in this case, all you're doing in that particular cell is you're taking that $1,557,938 and multiplying it by the interest rate, which is 12, dividing it by 12, and if you do the math, then you should match up with the number that was there, 15,579.38. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so in essence, 0.12 divided by 12 is basically what? 1%. Okay? So you can really almost just move the decimal place over in this particular case. Because it's just where you're really multiplying it by 1%. Because 12% divided by 12 months would be 1% per month. All right? So we move on down to the next one. Just to see, once again, same formula. All you're doing is you're just taking the ending balance from the previous month, which is now escalated to the 31,31,455.38. Doing the same math, multiplying it by the interest rate divided by 12. Okay? Everybody cool with that? Yep.
You don't have to add the previous interest to the loan?
I'm getting to that.
Okay, okay.
For just the construction interest, all we're doing is we're taking the previous loan balance and doing the math.
Got it.
Where you're about to get your question answered is when we move over to the actual interest calculation column.
All right.
Okay? So, now, the loan balance column, this is, in essence, a cumulative running balance of not just your principal, but also your interest, okay? So what you will see, just to kind of, I'm just trying to point a few things out, your actual project cost, or the principal, is this 8309, okay? In other words, all you're doing is just adding up all the actual project cost. Everybody see that? Whereas the construction interest column is, obviously you see that number getting larger and larger over time, and obviously accumulating, and so the total amount of interest is $692,000, but the reason it's getting larger and larger and larger is because your balance on your credit card, if you will, or your line of credit is getting larger and larger and larger. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, we come over to the loan balance column, and we click on that, okay, and see what it's doing. It's basically taking your previous month's loan balance and then simply adding it to the new project cost and to the construction interest that was calculated on that ending balance. Does that make sense? Okay. And then we go over to the interest column, and this is just going to be pretty much just carrying over from the column C. Okay. Now, the principal reduction, like I said, if we type in something here, like $1 million, okay, what it's going to do is it's going to reduce the overall total amount that we obviously have as our balance, okay? Not going to be precisely by $1 million because you've got the interest cost that you've got to factor in, okay? But it does that for you, okay? All right. Okay, so now then, once again, down here at the bottom, let's take a look at once again, the numbers that are sort of provided to us. So under the project cost column, this is just simply a summation of all the project costs as we go across. The construction interest, same thing. All of those just added up. And those, obviously, are your two most important. However, if you add those two numbers together, you're going to get this loan balance number of the 9,001,416.43. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Now, also, just another thing to, if you want some additional clarification about this particular model and kind of, I pulled this directly from your textbook, including the numbers, okay, including the setup. So it's identical to what is in your book. All right. Now, right below this, I had a couple of quick little calculations to kind of be able to play around a bit with. And that is to basically say, okay, if we've got this $9 million, $1 and so forth construction cost, we're just pulling down from above, and then we come up with, this is an input, so we're just sort of pulling this one out of the air, but once again, this happened to be the example that your book gave, so I went ahead and went with it. So they're saying that your land cost and acquisition cost are going to be roughly almost $3 million. So adding those two together, we get total project cost of 11.9 million, almost 12 million bucks. Okay. So using that information, which is pretty straightforward, if we take that total project cost or value and then apply a 12% cap rate to that, then that means we would need to get a required net operating income based on that cap rate of about $1.4 million a year, okay? Just to kind of, once again, backward math into it, okay? Now, with that, there's another little piece of this, just to kind of give us some sort of a sense of whether the numbers are realistic or not, or kind of what they're actually telling us. And that is, if you want to figure out what your cost per square foot is for your construction, okay? Just the construction cost only, not the land cost, okay? You take the total construction cost of the $9 million, and in this case, I have a gross building area of 120,000 square feet of gross building area. So take that, divide by that, and that will give you your construction cost, in this case, of $75 a square foot, okay? Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about that?
Can we call the required NOI based on the cap rate the return on cost, pretty much?
You could. I mean, it's just another way of looking at it.
Okay.
I mean, because in essence, it's if it was an all equity deal, it's basically a cash on cash return.
Okay.
Okay. But it's also just a cap rate. Okay. All right. Any questions? Feel good about that one? Okay. All right. Let's move on to the other one, which is a bit more complicated. All right. Okay, so the other one, everybody got a copy of the handout? Christina, did you get one?
Oh, no, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a little bit different, but somewhat similar. This is sort of a nice little sort of construction loan example, and the other handout, the one that is kind of printed out for you. What this does, this little one-pager back in front, kind of explains what's up here on the screen, okay? And specifically the whole model. And I put this in myself by hand yesterday to obviously give you guys a working example of how this construction project budget is actually put together. And part of the reason I did this is because I think this is a nice, tidy, concise sort of framework that as you're going to be putting together construction budgets, especially for the upcoming development class in the winter, this is a good little model to use. Okay, it's detailed enough, but not so detailed that it gets ridiculous. Okay, I mean you can go out there and you can Google and you can probably find construction budgets that will take up pages and pages and pages and pages. But that's not inherently necessary for the purposes of what we're trying to obviously get around to. So what this little model does, if you want to read through the example, feel free. But in essence, they've got it set up in such a way, we kind of blow this up a little bit on the screen just so that you can maybe see it a little bit better. As I'm pointing to it. Okay. All right. So what they have done is they've put together this construction budget, and they've, the original budget, or what was originally proposed, is kind of over here on the left-hand side, and then what the actual expenses after the fact, after the construction was done, are over here on the right-hand side, which are basically pulled off of the spreadsheets down below. All right? So in their particular case, and there are a couple of, I guess, kind of neat things to sort of pull from this, and it was a start with, once again, land acquisition. Okay? You take a look, they've got $546,000 that they allocated to land acquisition, so once again, buying the land. Okay? And actually making the notation over here on the right, not funded by the loan, funded by the developer. Okay? So once again, this is what I was talking about earlier. In many cases, the construction lender is going to see that as part of the equity within the deal. Well, in addition to the actual land acquisition cost not being funded by the loan, we also have closing costs that are not going to be funded, okay, to actually purchase land, if you will. Now, if you look down, there's a little asterisk next to, obviously, the closing cost, and it says, see the itemization below. So you kind of go down there, and these are just some examples, okay, of specific closing costs that are going to be quite common in terms of loan commitment fee, which is kind of what, we've been talking about, loan origination fee, same kind of thing, all right? Document preparation, title insurance, courier fees, title company fees, government recording transfer charges, plan review, environmental assessment, phase 1, and appraisal fees. So all of those kind of lumped in there, and taken in total, that 47,000 or something like that for the closing cost, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so once again, developer buys the land, pays for the closing cost, and then also one other piece under legal, while it includes zoning and entitlements, there was also legal work that had to be done up front for the purchase. So they sort of separate that out, and it's like $8,000. It's not going to be funded by the loan. It's going to be funded by the developer. Okay? Now all that becomes a little bit clearer if you start looking down the model and you begin to look at where the charges are occurring and when they're occurring. Okay? Any questions up to this point? Yep.
Would a construction loan typically, would they require you to come with architectural plans beforehand, or?
Yeah, most of the time, yes, or at least preliminary ones. Not maybe not necessarily construction drawings. Which the difference between sort of the architectural plans and the sort of construction drawings is the architectural plans are going to be, fairly straightforward, fairly basic, I guess, in the sense that it's going to show, okay, this is what it's going to look like. This is maybe the floor, plan layout, that sort of thing, and maybe give some idea about the what sort of exterior cladding you're going to have, and maybe some of the finishes, that sort of thing. But then the construction documents, they're going to be drawn up by the architect, are going to be much more detailed in terms of very precise measurements, very precise detail as to every little component of what materials are being used, and it's a whole nother level, if you will, of documentation. It's a lot more expensive because that first piece, yeah, is more the creative kind of design piece, whereas the second piece is more the operational piece. Okay? All right. Other questions? Other good question. Other questions?
The architect would put together both of them, right?
Normally, yes, but you could actually have a design architect that's like the famous, sort of named architect, and they'll do the quote-unquote sort of rendering of, okay, this is really how it's going to look. But then the dirty work details of actually making it work and operationalizing that may be done by a much less sort of expensive, just kind of normal sort of production architect. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, other questions? Before we move on down the page. Okay.
That operating deficit is like a working capital?
Yes. So the operating deficit, and we're going to get into this in a minute, but in essence, once you kind of have completed the property and you've opened it up for occupation or occupancy, then you're going to have obviously operating costs until you maybe get it fully leased. And that's kind of what this is referring to, is that while the property is being leased up, you're still going to have some office-related costs that you're going to have to take care of. And as a matter of fact, within the handout, on this one-page handout, they actually list out on the back side what some of those items are for the operating deficit. Doesn't do it, you can take it else. Okay. Now the others of these, I mean, we're kind of going through this, obviously permitting fees with the local government. Actually, even though the property may be zoned the way that you need it zoned, there still are probably going to be fees and charges that you're going to have, permitting fees that you're going to have to pay to the local government. Usually those fees are supposed to go toward, once again, having their inspection teams be able to go out, physically take a look at the property, ensuring that you're doing what you say you're going to be doing, you know, that everything is up to code and so forth, so on. And then we were talking about the sort of legal, but you know, here saying include zoning and entitlements, that in the event that the property maybe is not currently zoned for what you want it to be or need it to be, then you're going to have the legal fees, obviously, to go through sending that land use attorney in and basically pleading your case on why this property should be zoned the way you want it to be, and hopefully get whatever allowances or conditions that they're going to impose on you taken care of. Okay? And then property taxes, that's pretty straightforward. That's going to be kind of pretty much a one-year, you know, expense each year based upon the value of the property. Now, keeping in mind, this is one of the little things just to put in the back of your mind. It seems like a simple little thing, but you'd be surprised how many people don't always think about this. When if you buy the property, what is the property tax value based on? If it's just, there's no building on it, it's just based on the what? The land. Well, obviously, once you build a $10 million, $20 million, $30 million building on top of that land, your property taxes are going to go up, okay? And dramatically, obviously, reflecting how much, obviously, you've invested in the property. Now, having just said that, and I don't want to get too far afield on some of this, but as we were sort of talking a little bit about, I think last week or maybe the week before, sometimes local governments, if they're wanting to incentivize a project, they may say, hey, come in, build what you're going to build, and we're not going to charge you property taxes on the improvements for maybe 5 years or 10 years or whatever it might be, simply because they want you to build whatever it is that you're planning to build. If there's some sort of a overriding public-private partnership that they're willing to engage in. Does that make sense?
So just defer.
Well, I say defer. Well, defer is not the right word, because defer implies that they're going to accumulate,
Okay.
and that you're going to have to pay them. But you may be able to, in essence, forego paying them for a period of time. Okay. All right. Moving on, we already talked a few seconds with the operating deficit, but Louis brought up this, as I said, on the back of the handout, it kind of lists out, these are like once you get the property pretty much built, once you've got a leasing office established within the property, over the next several months, while the property is being leased up, you're going to be running a deficit because you're not generating any income, but yet you've got these operating costs to get the property leased. Does that make sense? Okay? That's just why it's called an operating deficit. Okay? And then the interest expense, that is simply, just like we were talking about with the previous example, this is simply the accumulation of all the construction interest. Okay? All right? And then the developer's fee. Well, that's definitely the ones we're going to talk about. So one of the ways that a real estate developer can make money, especially if it's a project where they're not personally investing their own money, is to charge a development fee, okay? Like a consulting fee, all right? So with the example of something like this, what will happen is you have someone that wants this building built, they have certain standards and conditions that they want met, and timelines and budgets and so forth, so on. So they'll hire, let's say, a developer to come in and they'll say, okay, once a month or once every 3 or 4 months or whatever, we're going to give you a fee for basically doing the things that are necessary to move this project along to completion. all right? And so in essence, it's a salary, for all intents and purposes, to the developer to actually get the project done. Now, sometimes it's a fixed fee based upon a percentage of the overall project value. In other cases, it may be a fixed fee, but there could be bonuses tied to it, depending on if you can finish quickly, if you can get it leased up more quickly, if you can meet all other sorts of kind of performance metrics. There could be ways to enhance that. But you'll see as we kind of look at the actual numbers here for this and kind of how this sort of works. All right? And then moving on down, that gives us sort of the subtotal of what the project cost sort of should be. But then we also have contingencies are basically those things that you just have no idea where they're going to come from, totally out of left field in terms of weird, strange, unforeseen circumstances. Okay, that's the only way to describe them. It's just things that just are going to happen. That miscellaneous issues that you may have with the local government, miscellaneous issues that you may have with a contractor, miscellaneous issues that you may have with neighborhood groups, miscellaneous issues that you may have with the architect, whatever. That's what the contingency is meant to pay for. Okay, make sense? But you always want to definitely build one in because usually there's always something. All right. Moving on. So, as we kind of scroll down, all right, once again, I've already shown you, these were the itemization of the closing costs, which get populated above, all right. Now we move down to the actual construction loan draw. All right, now this is pretty cool, in one sense because of the way in which it breaks things out, and it does so by, now, once again, you can look at it on your screen. It's also printed out in full, although you probably need, magnifying glass to be able to read it. I didn't print it out with the idea that you would actually be able to read it, but you could at least see, in general, kind of what it looks like, okay? So, this is the construction loan draw, which is the top half of your spreadsheet on the handout. And so you've got, obviously, in the first column over here, the first line item, you've got where the loan closes, or in other words, when you initiate the project, time period 0. And then from that point forward, month by month, okay, over time. And then in the first column, and this is where the other handout comes into play, where you've got column number 1 here of land acquisition, okay? This construction loan example handout, you look down at number 1, land acquisition, okay? And so everything basically goes column by column and explains specifically what it entails, okay, and what's occurring there. So as we work our way over, obviously this first one, it's pretty straightforward. The land acquisition of the $546,000. Then basically the next column over, and now keep in mind, all of that is occurring at time period 0 whenever the project is basically being initiated. Okay, as we're going across, we're not going across in time, we're going across by category. Does that make sense? Okay, time in this case is down. All right, so we go over to the next column. This is our actual construction drawings. Okay, so let's take a look at those. Kind of scoot up here a little bit. But basically we've got a 12-ish, 13, 14, maybe month construction process. And so, and you sort of see, now one of the things, and this is, I think fairly reflective of what does happen in reality, you sort of look at the magnitude of these costs and when they occur, okay? And sort of look at what happens. Those first few months of construction, not a lot of expense, okay? Because it may be time consuming to do whatever is being done in terms of site prep work or whatever may be happening. But the point being is not a lot of expense. But then all of a sudden, somewhere here around the 7th or 8th month, you've got a huge amount of the construction cost all happening at once, with the bulk happening here around the 9th month. Okay. Now we can actually go down further into the construction budget and see what is actually taking place there. But just, I'm just pointing that out because I think it's kind of interesting to take note, but that's not that uncommon. In other words, very seldom are you going to have the same expenses for your construction each and every month, okay? it's going to be based upon what work has been done during that month, and then ultimately what has to be paid for. Does that make sense? Okay, it's fairly basic, but at the same time, it's something I think it's something you make sure you need to understand. Okay, now over on the right-hand side, a little further right, past the construction and so forth. Okay, now we've got, in this case, here are the fees that are being paid. Once again, you take a look at the handout and see specifically miscellaneous sort of construction-related legal fees. Okay, so basically this column, then we move on.
That'd be like permits?
Sorry, it could be permits, whatever. But the point being is those are the fees are being paid when they're being paid. Okay? Same sort of thing with the legal fees. Okay, those are when those are being paid. Now the next one is kind of interesting because the draw for or the developer fee charge. So the developer is not being paid every month. The developer is basically being paid, it looks like quarterly. All right? And so they're getting a charge here, or basically accepting a salary or a fee of this $83,750, you know, every fourth month. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, we move on. Property taxes is a one-time expense paid up front. Got that out of the way for the year. And then the contingency, we don't actually have any contingencies, so that's just kind of empty all the way across. And then the operating deficit column. So column 9, or K on your spreadsheet, and this is just simply, once again, the itemization of the cost from month to month for basically opening kind of a leasing office and basically getting the property kind of up to speed in terms of the expenses associated. Okay? Then, now all of those are in yellow purposely because those are all, in my mind, changeable. Okay? Anything in yellow on this spreadsheet is meant to be that you can put in values and change them to your satisfaction. But don't change anything yet, or at least keep a saved version of this. All right. Then we kind of go over to where a lot of the kind of the finance related things are beginning to occur, and basically columns 10 through 15. So this first one, the amount funded by the developer is just simply the addition, if you will, of those charges the developer paid at time period 0, as you're sort of working across the page in terms of land acquisition, the legal fees of $8,000, and the closing cost of like the $47,000. But anyway, added together, the developer is putting in $601,000 into the project. Make sense? Okay. Then the part that's actually funded by the construction loan, or in essence, the draws on the construction loan, those, now all those other columns are just being added up, and the summation is being placed here in column 11. So this is simply including all other fees in addition to the construction, like the legal fees, the developer fee, whatever else, everything is now being compressed into this column. Does that make sense? Yes? Across. Okay? Once again, you can click on the cell and see the formula that all you're doing is just adding up everything in that row all the way across. Okay? Now, this is kind of interesting that they did their model this way, which is to have kind of a variable interest rate. And if you read their explanation, that in essence, they've got sort of a base rate, but then they, in essence, are saying we're going to tie it to some sort of an index. And in their particular case, it just so happens that the interest rate is going down over time, which is a great thing for you as the, obviously the developer of this project, to have a ever declining interest rate. The part that's a little wonky that we're going to talk about here just for a second is actually calculating the next column, which is the interest due, okay? Because of how they chose to sort of set their model up. I don't know that I would have set up quite this way, but I wanted to match the example, so I did it the way that they wanted to do it. And that is, if you look at the formula, so what you're basically doing is you're taking the interest rate for that particular month of the 9.5, which is cell N40, and you're dividing it by 360. Now think about that for a second. What does 360 represent? Well, it represents days in a year. Well, that's not really precise. I mean, you know, obviously we have at least 365 days in a year, if not 366 on leap year. So, but strangely enough, there's modern convention, the idea of 360 days in a year, and part of that comes from basically saying we have 12 months with 30 days in a month, 12 times 30 is 360, okay? And so it's just kind of become, you know, in some circles, kind of a modern convention, but it's not precise, is what I guess I'm trying to say. I like precision, all right? But we went ahead and did it the way that they suggested to do it, all right? So you take the interest rate, divide by 360, that in essence is giving you a daily rate of interest, okay? The 9.5 divided by the 360, does that make sense conceptually? Okay, but then what they're having you do is then multiply that by the actual, this is what is kind of weird about it, by the actual number of days that that month has, okay? So that is where this B40 minus B39 comes into play, all right? That is my calculation of how many days were in that particular month. And I'll go back and I'll explain that in 1 second as to how I did that. All of that then gets multiplied by P39, which is what? The balance from the previous month, okay? Just like we did with the other construction loan. Okay, that part's the same. But now, the B40 minus B39, here's what I did. And you could have potentially come up with a more creative way of doing this, but when I was building it, what I did was to simply say, okay, we're gonna look at how many days are actually in the month, and one of the things that once you put a date into Excel, so for example, if I go over here and I say, all right, I'm gonna take this date, 31st of March, in this case 2001, and I subtract out basically, let's say 2 months prior to that, which is cell B39, that's going to tell me, well, it obviously comes up in dollars, but it's actually 59 days, okay? Because the month of February has 28 days, and the month of January obviously has 31. Does that make sense? So that's a cool thing that you can do, that whenever you have dates, specific dates, you can add and subtract dates, is what I'm trying to, I guess, articulate. Does that make sense? You may or may not have known you could do that, is what I'm pointing out. That whenever you put dates down in Excel, it thinks of each day as just a numerical number. And so you can add and subtract dates to your heart's content and sort of, like, just let me do something just to sort of show you what I'm talking about. So I'm not just, you know, making this stuff up, or you think I'm making this stuff up. All right? So what is today's date? Today's date is November the 11th, 2017. Okay, so I put that date here. Okay, so let's just say I put in my birth date of 01/15, or January 15, 1968. Okay. All right, now what I can do is I can go here, I can do equal minus that date, and that'll tell me I've been alive for 18,198 days. Okay, that is the way that Excel keeps track. Every day is a unique number. So that you can put in any date and it will return a value to you in days. Okay, does that make sense? All right? So somebody wants to do it for fun? Anybody want to give me a birthday? No? Okay. All right. Simple enough. Okay, now we go on down. All right. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so down here below all of those particular inputs, we have two lines, a total line and a budget line. The total line is just simply summing up what is above it within the model. So those are actual numbers in the total line, all the way across. And for the most part, they may be the same. In some cases, there are going to be differences between that total line and what was originally budgeted for the property. Okay, all of these numbers down here are all based upon what inputs that you put in. Okay, so those are automatically calculated for you. Yep.
You know the amount that you allocated for contingency?
Yeah.
So if you don't use that,
Yeah, this is extra money.
there's extra money, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there like a rule of thumb for coming up with the contingency?
It really depends on the kind of project because, like for example, if you're doing a renovation project, like for, let's say, an old historic building, you're gonna probably put in a pretty massive contingency because you just don't know what may be behind the walls as you start to renovate the building or underneath it or whatever. So, you know, there, you might put in something as high as a, 30% contingency. But yet, whenever you're talking about something that's just, extremely mundane, like this particular property is about as mundane as it gets because it's what? Self-storage. Self-storage building, there's probably not a whole lot that's going to go wrong with building a self-storage building because you're pretty much talking about, in most cases, either concrete masonry unit walls or tilt wall construction, and it's about as basic as you can get. There's not a lot of plumbing, there's not a lot of electrical, there's not a lot of anything other than concrete. So but the contingency, with a project like this, in many cases might just simply be delays, like delays brought on by rain. The workers can't get out there, or they can't work in the mud, or whatever it might be, and that would be a normal contingency for a project like this.
The lender might set that, correct?
Most of the time, it's gonna be the kind of the project manager, construction manager, ultimately whenever they're based upon their own past experiences, what they kind of feel comfortable with, but it's normally just going to be a number that hopefully will be sufficient. That's all I can really say. I mean, it's just, and it's not like, I've heard some projects where it's just a couple of percent, and others, like I said, it's a huge. Okay. Put it this way: if I were an aspiring developer and haven't done a lot of projects, I'd want a really high contingency. Okay, because there's a lot of things I don't know that potentially are going to pop out and be a problem. But if I've done this project over and over and over and over again, like I've built like something like if I'm building like McDonald's sites or something that you literally you're just, it's like just stamping them out, there's probably not going to be that much of a need for contingency. Okay, so we kind of go across the page here, and simply pretty much everything's just kind of gets totaled up, so you can see with respect to the overall project cost with the loan involved, you've got about a little over $3 million. The difference between that and the number below it is this number only includes kind of the loan information, does not include the developer's contribution of the $600 and something thousand. If you remember, we said that early on. Does not include the land, does not include the closing cost, does not include the legal fees of $8,000. So that's going to be the difference between that amount and the total. Okay? Okay. Now we go down to the final piece of this, which is the construction detail sort of breakdown. Okay, now this is a little bit different in the sense that this time goes across the page. Okay, and what's going down the page are just simply the different component pieces of the construction. All right, and it's kind of interesting, for the most part, they kind of ordered this, to a certain extent, as to when the work occurs. Not precisely because there's overlap and some, repetition and things like that, but for the most part, yeah, you're going to do your site work before you do your concrete, before you do your masonry, before, so forth, so on, as you kind of work down the page. And so all they've done, month by month, you can see what dollar amounts, in essence, are basically being incurred. And as I said earlier, you can see that within certain months, like month 9, this was the one that had the biggest dollar amount, that a lot of stuff is occurring there. And as you can go over here, to the left-hand side and see all the different things that are occurring there. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting that they left in here on purpose, because this is just kind of a standard, normal, relatively straightforward list of items. What item are there no expenses for? What item, or what line item are there no expenses for? Conveying systems. Okay, look all the way across. $0 being spent on conveying systems. What are conveying systems? Oh, come on, think about it. Elevators. Okay? Conveying systems are elevators. All right? You convey things from one level to the next. Okay? And so with the self-storage unit, chances are this is not a multiple level self-storage unit. It's just one of the ground level self-storage units. So therefore, there are no conveyances needed. Okay? Make sense? All right? But
And
then
ticket
we look-
escalators are also conveying systems?
Yeah,
Is that
another
why?
example. Yeah.
How come there's 13 draws and then there's 24 months ahead of it?
Because there's only 13 months of construction. The
Uh.
rest is lease up.
Okay.
So if you look up above, I mean, which again, you can't quite see this from here, but if you just kind of get a general idea that our construction stops pretty much midway, and then what starts or takes over, in essence, is the lease up.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so once again, you know, just kind of scrolling across, then you can see, once again, month by month, what the expenses are for the construction piece of it. So you can see it by category, what the expense was. You can also see by month what the expense was by category as well as overall. Okay? Any questions on it? I mean, it's fairly straightforward. Now, part of the question that you should have is where do you get information like this? Like if you're wanting to do a project and so forth. One of probably in our library's got some subscriptions to this, but you can also find some of it online. But there are different costing manuals, and some of which are fairly basic. I mean, there are the Marshall Swift guides. Is one brand that also RS Means and others. They'll publish these ridiculously detailed guides for particular types of construction, different types of materials, and so forth, so on. But you can also find ones that will give you kind of a fairly nice average sort of breakdown by component for property type. And like the one that I sent you via email gives you just by property type or product type that you can just put in, pick a product type, put in the geographic location for it, and then it pretty much spits out an average overall value per square foot that you would use as kind of a construction cost. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. All right. Any questions? We good?
So just from like a logic standpoint, right, with the construction loan, you want to kind of offset most of your major construction to the end, right?
Well, yeah, to a certain extent, if you want to look at it from that perspective, yeah, if you could push a lot of your really expensive items in your construction process toward the end of the process so that you don't have to incur the cost, up front and pay for them up front. I mean, because you could, I mean, you wouldn't inherently want to do this, but I mean, you could, with your lender's permission, like try to buy all of your materials up front in one big fell swoop. It'd be kind of a stupid idea to do that because you'd have to find, number one, a place to store all of it.
Right.
Number two, it'd probably get stolen. Number three, it's like, it's not inherently there, I mean, in the sense that the whole idea of part of the whole idea with the construction process is that you have more of like almost a just-in-time delivery method, that the moment that your contractor, for whatever work it is that they're doing, that hopefully that product that they need, that material that they need, is there precisely whenever they need it, and not really that far before they need it because of all those other issues.
So that's a good way to like the GC, right?
Potentially, yeah, but I mean, it's also just just to me, it's just kind of common sense that you would not want to, spend the money before you have to. But also, it does make sense that, yeah, that, wait until the end to do some of the finishes, which only makes sense anyway, that you've got to kind of wait till the end to do a lot of the upgrades and special finishes. Okay, anything else? Other questions, thoughts, observations on this?
Is possible explanation for the interest rate going down midway, just because you're dispersing more funds at that point?
You know, and that would be an initial gut reaction, except that they actually happen to give the explanation in the handout, which is that basically at that particular point in time, interest rates happen to be just going down, okay, and going down precipitously.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
The overhead and profit is pretty much the GC's profit and the project management office of the GC, right?
Right.
That you have to pay, okay.
Okay. Other thoughts, questions on it?
Duration of construction loans in the US, duration usually is what, 3 years, 5 years?
It totally depends, once again, it totally depends on the project. If I got a simple little project, you know, I might be down a couple of months. I mean, when I say simple, I'm talking like a home renovation kind of project, you know, a couple of months for a construction loan. But if we're talking about, you know, a normal sort of, what is normal, but I mean, just like a small, mid-sized building, you know, it may be, you know, 6 months, 12 months, you know, depending. I mean, you know, it's, I mean, I'm sure all of you, you know, you've watched projects emerge out of the ground, and you've seen some projects that it's like you turn around, you blink, and they're up, you know, and you're like, how in the world did they build that quickly? And then there are other projects you're like, oh my God, when are they ever going to finish? But it's just, and you know, sometimes it's due to their contractors, but it's also maybe due to the fact they've built that particular type of product over and over to the point where they can get in there and literally build it, you know, within a couple of days. So, it really depends. Okay. All right. Other thoughts, questions, observations on this? Okay. Now, time for a little quiz. All right. This is my gift to you.
Oh, man.
You get to keep everything out. I tried to make it impossible to get anything other than 100 on it, but I thought so. Most people got 100. I tried to make it impossible.
It's based off not only Excel, but it's the same thing.
You shall see. Okay. We got one? Dustin, did you get one?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see it.